on brand. All right, so we're gonna count down. Julian, can you do me a favor and keep an eye on that when we're like officially live? I believe it's 30 seconds. I'll, I guess, give my opening remarks as soon as we officially are. Thank you all for being here.
You're live. You're 20 seconds live. 22 seconds live.
We'll have, okay. All right.
That's what it says. I'm just telling you what it says in the little corner of there, brother.
No.
There we go.
There we are. All right. Okay. Hello. For those of you who might be tuning in live online, welcome. We're here with a crowd of a couple dozen or more at UD Cannabis Co. right in the heart of Boston. When I say literally right across the street from Fenway Park, I am not joking. It's not hyperbole. My name, for those who are familiar, is Jack Forceline. I am an investigative reporter and director of psychedelic programming for a number of different analysis reporter and director of psychedelic programming for NECAN. I'm also in partnership with some incredible local partners. One of the co-founders of this new exciting community showcase series, Portal 2 Plants and Other Medicines, presented by our gracious media, primary media sponsor, Talking Joints Memo. He's not able to join us tonight, but for those who are here, those who are tuning in around the world, hopefully, Chris Ferrone, founder of Talking Joints Memo, deserves huge credit. Without him, I would not be here standing in front of you. I would not have gotten my start as a reporter in the first place. So much of this goes to him. So I want to give a huge shout out to that. I also want to give thanks. We heard some before we went officially live, some opening remarks from Jordan McKenzie Whitaker, CEO and one of the co-founders of our great event production planning partners at the Whitaker Group, based here in Boston, Massachusetts. Incredible team they have. It has been a thrill and one of the greatest honors of my life to date to help bring this vision together. Something that started for me in the pouring rain at the Arnold Arboretum over in Jamaica Plain, following a bunch of mushroom foragers around on a Sunday. And actually, one of our panelists tonight, who you will meet later, was my first source ever on the beat, and I met him at that very first event. So again, this has been a vision that's a long time coming. So I will get to, I guess, my opening remarks. Those of you who may know me know I love to be a rambler. That said, this moment tonight, the precipice that we have here in New England, and specifically in the state of Massachusetts, for what the plant medicine and specifically psychedelic advocacy movement might become over the next 5, 10, 15, 25 years, century on, is inevitably important to have rooted, at least in part here in Boston. For those unfamiliar, Boston is definitely one of the flashpoints and places of the failed, or some might not like the term failed, but misshapen, misstep-riddled psychedelic revolution of the mid-20th century, with the Harvard undergrad psychedelics club, a number of different organizations based in and around research. And for those of you who are also not familiar, though many of you might be if you're tuning into this, last fall, Massachusetts had and lost an incredible generational opportunity to pass a statewide ballot initiative that would have duly legalized and decriminalized use of, possession of, etc., certain psychedelics in certain forms. The story of that campaign is one that is very much intertwined with the story of the grassroots movement here in New England. Any number of different levels that we will certainly get into tonight. But I did just want to note, before we really get going, and I will bring up our incredible community organizers and their representatives to briefly introduce themselves before we get going on our panels. But if you are in this room, if you are tuning in live, wherever you are in the world, if you're watching the recording later on Wednesday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I don't know, you are tapping into one of the most unifying issues in American politics today, at a time where so much uncertainty and hyperpolarity is the norm. In this room alone, I am willing to bet a lot, but I'm willing to bet that any number of different political perspectives is represented in this room. And for a very brief time tonight and Friday, and hopefully moving forward, hopefully more than just monthly, stay tuned, we will be able to remove ourselves from some of the hyperpolarity and tap into the idea of plant medicine advocacy as a pathway to increased cognitive liberty, personal freedoms, decriminalization of healing itself, but also to be able to build a better way forward with that intersectional mesh point. So many of us come to this space for. I'm willing to bet if we did a show of hands, both in person or in column, that any number of us are just 1 or 2 degrees separated from the mental health crisis, if not directly intertwined with how that's affecting our society on a global level. And right now, here in Boston, at this incredible venue, some of the brightest minds in this space, in this region, ready to talk to you all tonight. I have to say again that it is one of the greatest honors of my life to help this vision become a reality. So with that, I'd like to welcome up a couple of our community partners. They know who they are. I'd love to bring them forward. I'll give you a brief intro. Jamie Morey, who's one of the co-founders of Mass Healing. Mine Turnbull Brown, one of the co-founders of the Entheogen Belonging Collective. And Jenny Chen Robertson, who's one of the co-founders of the Saber Psychedelic Association of New England. I would encourage everybody to go read a Q&A that just came out earlier this week about SPAN and what they're up to. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to our community partners for just a brief 1 to 2 sentences. You'll hear a lot more about what they're up to, but who they are, where to find them, etc.
Hi, I'm Jamie Morey. I'm the founder of the grassroots advocacy group, Parents for Plant Medicine. I worked as the community engagement director for the ballot campaign, the Yes on 4 ballot campaign, and I just recently started a nonprofit, Mass Healing, which is dedicated to continued advocacy, research, education through amazing events like this, and access, providing people access now while we fight for legal change.
I'm Elijah Brown. I am half of Entheogen Melanin Collective. So we are a Black First collective, which we focus on education, harm reduction, and community within marginalized communities in Boston. I'm hoping to expand on that. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, or really just coming up to us.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Jenny Chen Robertson. I am one of the co-founders of Safer Psychedelics Association of New England, SPAN. You can find us at www.spanbase.org. Our primary purpose of finding SPAN is to destigmatize psychedelics so that we can enable people to have a true and authentic conversation about it. Our position is that people are going to engage with psychedelics, and when they do, we want to have a risk-reduced situation. We also want to help inform and empower those who are going to respond to a psychedelic situation, whether it is a parent, teacher, community leader, or friend. We want them to feel educated and informed, and so we provide education-based information, and we want to elevate the psychedelics, industry, if you will, or space to the highest ethical standards as possible. Thank you for having us.
All right, so we're going to bring up our additional first panelist. I would say really make sure we give our amazing community partners a round of applause. All right, so Katie, you want to join us for panel 1? Ellen as well. Come on up. All right, so I've got a mic over there. You guys switch our seating around.
Hey, everybody.
Might have to share. So I think we're gonna need, nope, all right. Joking with everybody is not fun. So you know what you know. Okay. It's public. Anyways. Okay. Everybody hear me okay? Yeah. All right, okay, we'll hop right into it. Okay, so our first panel tonight is Advocacy Awareness 101. There are a number of different reasons to, okay, all right. For some added context, I mentioned earlier that last year we had a failed ballot initiative that would legalize, duly legalized psychedelic therapy. We'll talk about that. But also in kind of an unprecedented, and I know that word is overused a lot, but just given historical trends with the kind of legislation that gets filed after a progressive policy issue fails as a ballot initiative in any state, particularly there's a history there of Massachusetts that's not happening. But there were actually a national record 12 different pieces of legislation filed related to psychedelics here in Massachusetts. They're broad ranging. I want to give a shout out to Mass Healing, who was involved directly with the crafting and filing of 7 of those different pieces of legislation, unprecedented with $0 budget, et cetera. But what we're going to talk about in terms of advocacy awareness, and this is where we'll turn it over to you all, is not only have there been a number of different grassroots scandals, and obviously a number of us here have had run-ins with a certain organization that we'll talk about. But advocacy awareness is about building, a better blueprint forward so that frontline advocates can have more agency as they interact with some of the political powers that be. They're inevitably trying to get involved in whatever policy reform might look like: local, state, federal, international, etc. Without further ado, Ellen and Kate, you guys have not had a chance to introduce yourselves yet, so I will turn it over to you for a brief intro, and then we'll jump right in.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kate Averick. Professionally, I'm the founder of Operator Academy, a cannabis workforce training. But today, I am here representing some of the work I've done in the psychedelic industry, specific to advocacy. I created one of the first decrim nature groups up here on the East Coast, Decrim Massachusetts. I was a partner in creating a bit of the movement that started the legalization or decriminalization discussions in 8 Massachusetts cities and towns. So deeply rooted in this in a personal endeavor, but not professionally. Personally, also a big mycologist. So if you want to talk about mushrooms, I'm your girl. But other than that, just really grateful to be here sitting amongst some really, pivotal and foundational educational partners. And I truly mean that from an advocacy panel as well as from professionally. I know that this is a labor of love and not one that gets paid well. So thank you all for all the work you've done. Glad to be here.
All right, Ellen.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ellen Brown. I'm a United States Air Force veteran. I am so excited to be here tonight. I am somebody that finds myself in regulatory reform. So when there are bill amendments up, when there are bill initiatives, when there is a time to go to the State House, that's when I like to show up and meet other advocates and talk to those who know what's going on and be able to get the details from the person who wrote it, which is such a really important thing. And when it comes to policy reform and when it comes to creating regulations, we need to create regulations that are going to be the most beneficial for the Commonwealth. And just like mushrooms talk to each other, we should talk to each other too. So I'm really grateful to be here and to be a part of this community.
All right, yeah, thank you.
Female panel, rare.
I think what's really interesting, we'll talk about that too, in terms of, we're going to have our second panels on intersectional advocacy and harm reduction in general in the plant medicine space. And what's really unique about cannabis is, plant medicine spaces is the strong female leadership woven into the industry, both here in Massachusetts and across New England. It's pretty remarkable. And I think is worth celebrating. Testament to all of you as well. So I guess our first kind of discussion prompt, if you will, and I'd love to pick your brains, but I mentioned that, we've dealt with some grassroots drama here in Massachusetts. For some very brief overview, I encourage you all to go read my reporting as well as subsequent reporting by Double Blind Magazine and Benz and Gov in Canada. But an organization that a number of you actually have became connected with after following this organization around, in Base Staters for Natural Medicine, is now rebranded as Base Staters for Creative Wellbeing. Their founder, an individual named James Davis, over time, kind of disrupted, a lot of the movement. The allegations that have been, charged, leveled against him, and a history of misconduct is all available to view online. But knowing that, so many of us on this panel and many of you in this room actually first connected by way of this individual who, for the sake of one specific example that generated some buzz, was caught allegedly impersonating, a U.S. Marine veteran and former collaborator of his, over the course of 9 months last year, a number of different other misconduct related allegations. Encourage people to look into it. With that, Kate, I want to start with you as somebody who was, on the front lines of decrim Massachusetts, which if you go back and you look at the media coverage from the early days of Cambridge and Somerville in particular, who were two of the first municipalities in the country to pass what's known as a local law enforcement deprioritization measure. They're not going to go after people who are growing using certain mushrooms in their home, psychedelics in their home. Why waste the tax dollars? Decrim Nature Massachusetts was at the forefront of that. And a lot of the media coverage of that down the line, because of advocacy awareness, one topics to discuss, got lost in the wash. And I personally don't think they've gotten the credit that they duly deserve. So Kate, can you talk to us a little bit about what worked in the building of decrim Nature Massachusetts, and also maybe some things, and then we'll go around with everybody else, that you wish you had known in the startup process? Anyways, take it
Yeah,
away.
great. Well, I think the unfortunate reality is with any emerging industry, grifters are bound and they take all shapes and sizes. There's no one way, one profession in these industries, whether it's cannabis or psychedelics works. And I'm no stranger to it. I've been working in the cannabis industry for 10 years now. Like, I've seen all shapes and sizes, but I think in the psychedelics realm, maybe I was a bit naive going into things, thinking that the people that are really graciously spending a lot of their time, like I had a discussion with a number of people before saying the psychedelic industry is really built off of people who volunteer, and they're volunteering because they care. They want to see change in the community, or they want to see change in their policies, or they're just pissed off at how people are treated. And I think in this industry, I really thought that there was going to be a lot more people that were not really looking at it from a profiteering perspective, at least at the grassroots level. I expect that from organizations and from therapy models, because you need to be profitable to be a business. Difference between a business and a hobby, And I think a lot of people to that extent, there was this mental separation. And then when I got into it, I was one of 4 other people who had started Decrim Nature, and it was all from the perspective of, we want to do something to help. I professionally am not tied to psychedelics, but personally I'm really interested in it. It's been something that's helped me personally, and just I have a multitude of respect for the people that work within there in the medical community, to again the grassroots and communities that have been using these things indigenously for years. And I just don't think it's the government's business to be in my house. So I'm a big fan of trying to figure out things that did work, and a big part of it was part of my own personal business philosophy, which is this whole double bottom line. So profit and purpose, I think both can coexist. For these kind of movements, they do need money to be funded in some way, shape, or form. And whether it's as small as giving stipends to people so that they can go attend rallies, people that have the time, or it's, as big as being able to hire someone for a lobbyist position, it's all really helpful and part of your strategy. I was very thankful to be part of a movement that had a national and international presence. It had pretty clear directives on what their stance was. It had national recognition, which was helpful. However, that also sometimes can be a hindrance, because what works in the West Coast doesn't work in the East Coast always. And I think these resolutions need to be spoken out from a community level, and really need to be led by the people in those communities. And we need to be handing the microphone over to those people to say what they want. Especially looking at my career in cannabis, a lot of the social equity and some other people who partner in the programs, put on by state regulators, but it's a lot of people telling you what you need for the communities rather than asking them. And so I think really the 2 biggest things is we had a fairly, anonymous model as well. I was not out there putting my face forward. It was the organization's name and our work. We really didn't try to take personal claim for a lot of the work that we did, because we wanted the focus to be on what are we doing, not who's involved. And I think that was really successful until some people maybe had a little bit of a different personal experience with how they wanted to live their advocacy, and then created another organization.
Mhm.
So I think the good thing is that, if you want to do something different, you can just go start a new org. However, there is some, help in getting that movement behind you, and having a numerous, other groups, again, work on their own resolutions, bring that success in. Because change is really slow moving.
Mhm.
So, you know, these were conversations that were had over the course of 2 years before anything was shown in the papers, before anything was really talked about publicly in town halls. So it was a lot of meetings. And again, I don't take any sort of claim for the work that was done there. That was all through a network of really dedicated volunteers that really rotated over the years. Like I said, not everybody is here for the long haul. You got 5 minutes today, you got 5 minutes for the next year, great. So I think just being flexible to what people are able to give, really trying to focus on the movement more than the people, and really just trying to highlight the individual community needs is really the best that I found out of my experience.
Yeah, there's definitely really a balance there, and we'll talk about more in this panel and et cetera. I want to jump in as our most seasoned and tenured cannabis advocacy. You've been in it from the start. You've seen what worked and what didn't work with legalization efforts here in Massachusetts. You've also been, kind of in the belly of the beast itself, having been appointed as one of the special witnesses for DEA's rescheduling hearings that have now stalled out. But nonetheless, you've seen the system, from the inside and out. And also, do some work within, with the Massachusetts Cannabis Control Commission here as well. What advice would you give, knowing what you know, both based on your experiences in the early days, but also now kind of become integrated with some of the bureaucracy as well, as to how grassroots advocacy groups can really assert agency from day one with some of these larger power structures?
That's a great question, and I'm so grateful to be here today with the advocates that are making it happen, with the educators that are making it happen, with the room of the people that are making it happen, because we make it happen. Our voices make it happen. Your legislators are looking to you as their constituents to see what are people from my town saying, what are people from my state saying, how am I going to empower those voices? And in an individual capacity, you can do so much by reaching out to your state representative, your state senator, and asking them to support bills that are going to be in the State House. We are at the 194th legislative session here in the state of Massachusetts. We have 2-year legislative sessions. There is a lot of work that needs to be done. And to Kate's point, absolutely, if you can give 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever you can do, be it phone banking, a phone call to your own legislator or representative, those are the biggest things that are going to make a difference. Your voice is going to make a difference. Showing up at the city council meetings, the State House, those are going to make a difference. And putting yourself out there, this isn't easy. And as time's gone on, so has there been a shift toward the view on cannabis, psychedelics, plant medicine, but we're very much on the forefront of that. And right now we're in a room full of friends and we're in a room full of like-minded people, but you might find you're the only person that is educated, you're the only person who's able to articulate the need for plant medicine. So we all have a responsibility, whether we're using it on a daily basis to microdose, or we use it sparingly where we need it, or however often you need it. It's just the availability to allow for choice, to allow for those cognitive liberties. And I think that that's something we can all really get behind. And what happens is when you introduce yourself to your legislator, be it your state representative or your senator, and you say, hey, I live in your town, I'm a constituent, I am educated on this topic, I would like to advocate for this topic. It builds that reform and it builds that rapport, because guess who you're going to see when you go to the State House? You're going to see your legislator, you're going to see your representative, and they'll say, oh, there's Ellen, I know Ellen, or I know Kate, or I know Jack, or I know the Whitacas, or so these kinds of things put you out there, and remembering that you want to be able to form that connection. We're not in opposition of each other. We need to learn to work together, and the legislators, depending, a lot of them are very much receptive. So making sure that you put yourself out there as a place where they can go, as a resource where they can get that information. So also understanding, and I know this wasn't necessarily the question, but don't give up. It's okay. We seldom do we ever get anything the first time we try. Am I right? So I'm here, you're here, we'll do it how we do it as long as it takes. So with that in mind, don't give up, put yourself out there, and know that, with the education, with the time, and with the community will come these changes. So I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, no, I think that's interesting. 2 quick reaction points, and then we'll skip over to Jamie for some perspective on what has worked for her and some of the challenges of getting an operation started out with limited upfront funding. A couple of thread points from what Ellen was talking about. One, as far as like, you are the people that reach out to legislators, what's so fascinating about how things went down with the question for psychedelics ballot initiative last fall is that despite seemingly leading in the polls, and I think all of us can agree in some form that local polling is important, despite seemingly leading in the polls with a large swath of undecided voters a week before election day last year, question 4 fell by like almost 14 points, pretty broad comparatively. A lot of money behind it. More to come on that soon. Read my previous work about that. Other great work in the space documenting that. But an informal Boston.com poll that came out shortly after the election indicated that 60% of respondents actually were open to psychedelic policy reform. We'll get to this with Jenny, in SPAN, but in a Q&A that was published earlier this week, we specifically talked about how there was just a lot of misconceptions surrounding, what the ballot initiative did. But nonetheless, both voters are really clearly, interested in some sort of policy reform. So is the legislature, obviously, 12 bills filed, national record, unprecedented, even though it's an overused word. But yeah, I think it's a good segue to ask Jamie, as far as, you were, folks, for some added context, Jamie, both founder of Parents for Plant Medicine, which predates the Question 4 campaign, but also was one of a couple of grassroots staffers, including one of our other panelists that were brought on formally to work for the Question 4 campaign. So Jamie's both worked on the front lines of grassroots advocacy, worked a little bit of bigger of a budget with some of these political powers to be, and is now fresh off of some impressive, legislative victories, getting all these bills filed, in the process of launching a new nonprofit venture. So Jamie, you talked a little bit about masculine before, but what would you say have been, to be good to go kind of down the line here with this community partner leaders, what have been some of both the most exciting parts and also maybe some of the more challenging parts of that advocacy group startup process?
Masculine.
Yes, and Parents with Plant Medicine, maybe how that intertwines with your experience in the campaign.
I think the most challenging thing for me is, finding the time. I am a mom of 4 kids that have a neurological autoimmune disorder and a lot of mental health issues. My oldest in particular, who's 22, is the reason why I got into advocacy. Just witnessing the failure of the current mental health care system to help some people, a lot of people, about a third of people have treatment-resistant health issues. That I just was desperate, a mother desperate to find a solution. Crazy.
Okay.
Is it me?
You're good. No, you're fine. Everybody can hear you. You're good.
That's what led me to research psychedelics for mental health. I also was married to an Iraq combat veteran who suffered from severe PTSD, and just mental health in this country is such a crisis. It affected my family in a major way, and even though I didn't really have the time for advocacy, I made it because it was so important to me that that this message get out. There's a lot of people who need help. It's just not offered through the traditional channels, and we need something new and something better and something that works. And we know these medicines work for people, and time is the biggest challenge. But I feel like some things are important enough to make time for. So after the failure of the ballot question, which was really disappointing, I just knew, it couldn't give up. I couldn't let the message be that this failed because of lack of support, because that's absolutely not the case. Our postmortem polling shows that over half of people support decrim and 2/3 support therapeutic access. So there's a lot of support in the state. The ballot question failed for other reasons, and I felt really strongly about continuing that work, but also trying to get legislation that would not only be a individualized medical model. I did not want that to be the story, was decrim and home cultivation are the reasons that this failed, and have the medical model be the only path forward for people. I feel like it's really important to support decrim, and I think it's really important to recognize the very long, thousands of years history of people using these medicines in indigenous culture, and bringing that wisdom into the conversation is super important to me. And also the community aspect and group healing. Mass healing is kind of play on words. We support people using plant medicines however they see fit, individually with a therapist, great, but also feel really strongly that the indigenous tradition of group and communal healing is a really powerful piece, and that community is medicine, and the two together can bring healing to the masses.
We'll definitely come back to when our third panel is on, we'll talk a little bit more about advocacy efforts and what the step-by-step process was. So, getting all those bills filed. I want to pivot to money, and we'll kind of circle back around. We talked a little bit, Kate as well as Ellen, obviously, talked a little bit about storytelling. We're going to talk about intersectional harm reduction and how different mesh points with those certain degrees separated from any number of different mental health crises, et cetera. But Imani, as far as how EMC's early startup storytelling and community building process, what that's looked like. Again, what has worked? What are some things that, in hindsight, you give advice about having a little bit more help or assistance or coalition building surrounding before doing something or hosting an event, et cetera? And what would you like to see from partner orgs like Parents for Plant Medicine, Mass Healing, and Decrim Nature Mass to ensure truly democratic and but also unified coalition building and leadership strategies?
So I would definitely say, just like Jamie, just time. Time for sure. We're only two people. So really relying on other grassroots groups that are aligned with our mission. And all of these women up here they're all aligned with what we're trying to do. And I think in this kind of climate that we're in, it's super important for us to be unified. We can't have like silos. We're all gonna have our individual goals, but collectively we have to all come together, or else this is just not gonna work. We're not gonna help the people that we set up to help. And how EMC started was Julie and I kind of struck up a conversation about wanting to showcase storytelling of our community, because we don't see that. And oftentimes him and I would be in different environments where we were the only Black person, only person of color. But we both knew that there were people that looked like us that were interested in this stuff. And how do we find those people? How do we get those people together? Because that's important. Right? Storytelling is something that brings people together. And we really got to see that during our first event, where people were very wary initially, but as people started sharing more stories, people got more comfortable and really supported one another. These people didn't know each other the day before, and they're sitting here like crying in front of people, strangers. And that's really powerful to have a safe space of people. And that's something that I think is absolutely needed, especially in our community. Because we don't have, there are times, oftentimes we don't have the luxury of being able to just be vulnerable with people that look like us. And that is what we wanna provide. Because you have to meet people where they're at, right? Not everybody can go off to Peru or Mexico or wherever. Why can't we just be here in our own space, on this land? Because this land is also ancestral. And a lot of people don't even know that. They don't know, the native groups that are here. You should, right? They were here before us. We should respect that. And one thing Julian and I really are passionate about is showcasing these indigenous groups that have supported these plant medicines for thousands of years. People like Maria Sabina, why does she die penniless? That's crazy. She should always be at the forefront of conversation when it comes to psilocybin, because without her, it wouldn't be up here, right? It wouldn't have been made mainstream without her, and she got nothing for that. She got nothing for that, and that's not, we don't want to continue that. We have to find the middle ground between respecting the indigenous cultures that have fostered these for so long, but also what that looks like here in the Western world, right? And we can find a balance. We can find that balance, hence why education is so important, right? Education, historical education. A lot of people don't know how we got here. Why are these substances Schedule I drugs? Why is cannabis still Schedule I drug? Why is it just decriminalized? Why is it not federally legal? Why is that? But things like alcohol are absolutely legal. Cigarettes, legal. Why? So it's that stuff, getting people passionate again, because I think we've kind of either don't know or we've completely forgotten how we've gotten here. And I think that's where Julian and I feel that's where we can fill that gap.
Yeah.
Providing that space for people to learn if they don't know or relearn. And also have a support system of people that look like you, people that understand those nuances that maybe another group may not.
Yeah.
Because we also need healing. And we may not have access to a therapist, but maybe you have an auntie that is really good at it.
Yeah.
And just I think another thing for us is both of us grew up in a predominantly white area. I grew up in Maine, Julie grew up in Western Mass. So we've had to navigate these spaces, and it was not an easy road. But within that, we had all these angels that have come through our lives, right? And we realized that that's a luxury. Not everybody has that. Not everybody has community. So for us, it's like paying it forward, because everybody needs community. No matter where you come from, everybody needs it. And so why not bring people together? Why not, right? Because I think every event we've had thus far, there hasn't been many, but they've all been very powerful, and storytelling has been the crux of that.
Yeah.
It's been the crux of that. To hear someone else's experience, be like, wow, that person went through that and they overcame it. Okay, I can do it. I got it. That's sometimes that's all people need.
Yeah. Well said. I had a geometry teacher in the 6th grade who, made it very prescient. I still think always relevant point that whoever, for every 5 kids that raises their hand with a question, there's often, 10 to 15 in the class that have the same question or more, and might be a little bit embarrassed or unsure to ask that question or where to go, or being willing to be vulnerable. So we'll pivot to Jenny here in just a quick second. 2 quick things about what Imani was saying. One is to talk more about some of the storytelling and intersectional perspectives on how to do that. She mentioned Julian a few times. You guys will all meet him later. He's sitting right here up front. I just can't see him on camera. He's one of the EMC co-founders and an important voice in the space. He also saved us. Both of them did by bringing their fancy camera equipment the last minute. So thanks to them. Those of you might not be able to see Imani's sweatshirt up close. It says Shrooms in the Hood. That was the first event that she referenced briefly. That they with their launch event, I guess, went back last. It was like still summer.
Yeah.
It's spring. Yeah. So I was fortunate enough to be able to cover that event and can attest to personally how powerful it was to witness folks who've never even considered. And so we'll get more to this to the intersectional harm reduction. It's worth noting that even beyond indigenous practices here, in North America and in the Americas in general, in the Western Hemisphere, there's a long and storied tradition of indigenous psychedelic use in Africa. Both ibogaine, which is a very hot topic substance derived from the iboga bush native to West Africa, as well as last year, for example, 2 new psilocybin mushroom strains were discovered in South Africa. We're still finding out new things about how certain cultures interact with these substances, and I think it's important to note the global considerations for better understanding that history and how it interacts with storytelling. So, Jenny, pivoting to you, SPAN is very much education focused. One of the things that was, I guess, the subheading of the Q&A that everyone with you and Bree, who's off camera as well, SPAN co-founder, Dr. Adriano Reeser. You're styling yourselves as our your friendly neighborhood safety dealers. The focus being, I think it's brilliant. Get some stickers going. I will buy one. T-shirt. Oh, yeah, amazing. So when you're here, stickers out front. On your way out, definitely grab one. But part of that's really true. There's a lot of veteran focus groups. There's a lot of like demographic specific advocacy groups. And it's really important building that community. But what SPAN is doing is broadening the conversation and having an apolitical approach to psychedelic and just in general drug-related education. You guys that talk a little bit about the webinars you've done recently on psychedelic specific. It's pretty cool. And how that weaves into the intersectional nature politically of support for psychedelics, right? There's conservatives who are very close to the veteran side of things. There's conservatives who are very libertarian, don't want the government to tell you you can't put a plant in your body. There's also conservatives who are totally and completely against this, but are open to at least next generation mental health treatment alternatives. So Jenny, what has worked and how did you agree? Obviously go read the Q&A as well, it's fantastic. But how did you guys kind of develop this blueprint for expanding the psychedelic and drug-related education conversation?
Yeah, thank you, Jack. Yes, you did an excellent job on the QA, so thank you for that and giving us that opportunity. And thank you again for everyone being here and sharing your time and your presence. We are so grateful to be here with you. So SPAN, we are, as Jack mentioned, apolitical. We don't care what you support, who you support, but if you want to learn about psychedelics, we are here to help you learn about psychedelics. And I also volunteered with Jamie. While Jamie worked for the campaign, I volunteered for the campaign for Measure 4. And I did a lot of phone banking for the campaign. And time again, I heard, yeah, I support plant medicine. Great. Because, my job is to get someone to vote yes, right? But I can't vote for this, Jenny, but thanks for calling. I was like, whoa, wait, how come? Why? Tell me more about that. Well, I don't want my kids to get into it. I don't want them going down the street and buying it. I was like, whoa, I got a lot of responses like this. And so what the common thread that I saw on this was a lack of education. Psychedelics has bad rap, right? It's very stigmatized. And so, which is, kind of political, right? Even though we are apolitical, my co-founder and I, we have our own political ideas, but our organization aside, we are apolitical. And so we realized, and this, our organization, it didn't matter to us whether the measure was successful, yay, or it failed, because we are educating people. And so when it comes around again, our goal is to destigmatize psychedelics. We want to also educate on what a psychedelic crisis looks like. It's very different than a psychotic crisis or psychosis, right? And we have a medicalized response framework for all of these incidents, but we do not have one that is suitable for psychedelics. If someone is in a psychedelic crisis, how you respond to that will harm if not responded in an appropriate manner. As an example, I talked to a clinician, a Harvard-affiliated clinician today, psychiatrist, who already does psychedelic therapy, ketamine specifically, and we were talking about why the difference with each psychedelic, with each medicine, the response might differ. And so what we've discovered is that there's a lot of niche information, and that, ketamine is good because it's federally allowed to be used for depression, off-label, right? But, LSD and these other medicines, maybe still kind of a lot of stigma towards it. And so our goal is to really destigmatize through education channels so that we can have an honest and, authentic conversation about it. The fact is, we are apolitical because we just simply recognize people are going to engage with this medicine. Our responsibility to humanity is to make sure people are safe, because my co-founder and I, and our panel up here, we know this medicine can work. Are there inherent risks? Yeah. Did you guys get up and, walk outside your door today? There's a risk in that, right? If you read the risk profile of aspirin, no one would take an aspirin, right? So there are inherent risks, and we're here to highlight what those risks are and to just allow people to have agency, to make an informed decision. We in no way are saying that, plant medicine is a panacea for everything, but if in certain frameworks, it can be used and it can work. Thank you.
Of course, yeah, thank you. We will wrap up this discussion. We're going to move it back to Ellen and Kate. One sentence down the line, wrap up. As for what comes next, psychedelic plant medicine advocacy at large. What would be, knowing what you know, knowing what you're learning here today about some of the new works that are in this space, what would be, your one piece of advice, towards trying to build genuinely grassroots, collaborative leadership coalitions?
Come here, come to this event, come talk to the people on this panel, come talk to the people within the room. I'm so excited to be here because I'm so excited to get to connect with all of you. Our community is what's going to grow this conversation. The interpersonal relationships that we all have and we all share as people that live within the Commonwealth, as people that are part of the community, we are going to be the ones that change these conversations and that help to make Massachusetts everything that we know we can be as far as leaders and pioneers for the entire United States. And it's not just the United States, it's other countries that are looking to us. So I'm really grateful to be here and to foster these conversations with you.
Kate, an add-on for your answer. You directly experienced the disruption and essentially dissolution of what was once a grassroots coalition due to some, manipulative and kind of targeted behavior to accomplish that consolidation of leadership for seemingly, allegedly, selfish and nefarious reasons. What advice would you give to, coalition leaders today, and what warning signs do you wish you had seen sooner, in terms of identifying potentially problematic, whether it's grassroots leadership or, power structure backed, hyper politically, hyper medically, hyper profit minded organizations that might get their hands dirty in all this?
I only get a minute.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's a big question. Honestly, it requires a little bit of a larger conversation. But I think first and foremost is be really strong in what your mission is. I think that a lot of organizations struggle to answer a very simple question: what are you trying to do objectively? Same thing like a business. You've got organizational goals. I think trying to set that from the beginning makes for a very clear cut. Are we following in line with what our goals is, with what our mission is, with what our values are, and it's less personal. And I think a lot of people who have diversion tactics, whether it's a personal malice or they're trying to slow, the movement, there's all sorts of reasons why people want to do that. I can't speak to each individual one, but I think that, again, leaning back on a very strong framework and saying that it's not personal, like this is what we all agree on, and then instituting rules within your organization that help to allow and empower all voices and not really create a hierarchy that requires one or two people to make decisions. Ultimately, you do need people to be the action leaders. So having systems that empower people to then lead individual initiatives, I think, has been really helpful. But again, looking back, like the fact is mycology has only been in industry for 40 years, so we're still working with substances that are difficult to get subject matter experts. We are in New England, which is known as a technological and medical hub. So I think people revere what we do here a lot more. And also, let's be real, politically speaking, things move so slow here. So we are really the textbook definition for what people look to for doing in other places, to Ellen's point. And I think that really the best that we can do is just really objectively try to focus on our mission. A number of these organizations have really unique niche focuses, and I'm here for it. And again, I think that how we're going to succeed is having a number of these very niche, very selective organizations that represent all these different groups that really care about making a change and seeing what the better tomorrow looks like on paper.
Well said. Pivot to Jamie here for a quick wrap up. One thing I will note, another organization that will be involved in the near future that's kind of in its formation for the Boston chapter to that kind of hyper niche, Psychedelics for Climate Action. It's a very interesting thread point there, mycelium and hemp and other plant-based remedies to combat climate change with infrastructure, et cetera. Excited to have them here and involved in the near future. But I really like what you pointed out there about really tapping into the hyper niche groups that exist. Another example is neurodelics. A lot of us skew, some of us, on this panel right here, all skew kind of in that neurodivergent tribe, if you will. Neurodelics doing some really interesting, harm reduction and just general informational stuff on Instagram and other outlets. Sort of at the intersection of, neurodivergence and psychedelic use, what that looks like responsibly, et cetera. We can have all those groups do more. I'm all for it. Jamie, pivoting to you. What advice would you give based on again, not to beat a dead horse, not to, overuse the word that's already overused, but after your unprecedented success in bringing on 7 different pieces of legislation of the 12, what worked? Reaching out to legislators, and what would you advise other groups to do in other states to develop the same relationships with state lawmakers?
I think what worked was having a little bit of stubborn optimism and yeah, and reaching out with personal stories. I think, as Amani mentioned, we see time and time again, throughout the campaign, having a really compelling personal story of why you're connected to this medicine and being able to share it really make a difference. I would definitely encourage people who want to get into advocacy but don't know how or feel shy or I hate public speaking is like my nightmare. I hate it, but you can do it. So yeah, I totally lost my train of thought due to the neurodivergence that was just mentioned. And the right way.
What you might advise, what worked?
What worked. So what worked was, yes, personal story, having a personal story that you're willing to share. And the other thing I think is having the data to back it up. So my background is in survey research and data collection, so my mind always goes to the research. And when speaking with these lawmakers, and following up my personal story, and why I think we should continue to take actions around these medicines, I was able to back it up with the data that we had from the polling around the campaign that showed, the immense interest in this still. So I think a combination of those two is what changes hearts and minds.
We'll talk about it a little bit in the final panel, but Jamie and a number of other, New England-based advocates, the Connecticut folks that were keen to join us, weren't able to tonight, unfortunately. In terms of our panelists, however, there is work to develop an interstate, regional, and maybe even a national alliance. So it's a really cool thread to continue to follow, and stay tuned, of course. Talk more later. Mani, conscious of time, how can both POC and non POC oriented plant medicine community leaders, or just frontline folks who are interested in this space and want to see a more diverse leadership for the health of discourse, what would you like to see allies commit to or dedicate themselves to in uplifting work like that at the EMC?
So
how can we do better?
So something that Julie and I often talk about is the expectation for our allies, non-POC allies, is if you're not on that John Brown vibe, and if you don't know who John Brown is, Google him. But if you are not out here side by side with us and really willing to endure even a fraction of what we endure, then it's not true allyship. It has to be, how can I help without making it about you? How can I help? How can I support? Those are the questions. Really trying to understand, having empathy, because you're never gonna be that person, right? You can't walk in their shoes, but having empathy is half the battle, right? Being transparent, being able to take in ooh, that was a hard thing to absorb, but okay, all right, how can I do better? And taking that without thinking that it's an attack on you. but it's really because, oh, I care about you enough to let you know this.
Yeah.
Those are the things. Those are the things that we need.
Well said. Would encourage folks to, to reach out to Amani and ask her a little bit about her experience in the early days of the grassroots movement. She was also another kind of grassroots refugee, if you will, some twisted leadership that drove her and, a lot of really great, dozens of advocates out of the space completely. Glad to have her voice in the space. More to come soon. Jenny, how can politically minded individuals best engage with an apolitical education organization like yourself? How can they best integrate an apolitical harm reduction and education perspective on psychedelics into advocacy strategies?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think that in order to really advocate for anything, right, you have to understand it. And hopefully what most people can do is they can come with an open mind. Chances are, if you're engaging with a form of education, you want to take something from it. You want to learn something new. You want to learn perhaps how to change your mind, right? And so being evidence-based and apolitical, we are simply providing education. And so we ask that you engage with us with an open mind. Certainly we are psychedelic friendly. I do want to put that out there. We recently had a webinar on how to taper from antidepressants. We're not saying that antidepressants don't work. We're not telling anyone how to live or what to put inside their body. We're simply acknowledging when people want to engage in a psychedelic experience or with a psychedelic medicine, people may want to taper. And if they do taper, what does that process look like? Because the fact is, a lot of clinicians are not taught how to taper. They're taught how to prescribe pretty well, though. And so, sarcasm aside, okay, so obviously I have a view on that, but SPAN does not. We have provided education on what are the things that one might want to consider if you are deciding to taper. Maybe you just want to taper, not even to engage with plant medicine, right? And so our speaker, professional nurse practitioner, trained fellow psilocybin intertrek graduate with Dr. Bray and I. And so we are trained on how to keep people safe. She is trained how to taper, and she has a practice of her own on how to taper, on coaching and psychopharmacology. And it's also really reflected in those who support us, not only everyone up here, but visit our website. You'll see that we have professionals in doing research, people who've written textbooks, people who are pharmacists who are interested in supporting the movement. And so that's how I recommend keep your mind open.
For those of you who might be tuning in, live or might be watching the recording, SPAN has been using the works not only at, we'll talk about this later too at ECAN Boston, but stay tuned for some exciting SPAN-related content down in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania Cannabis Convention the weekend of March 30th. Real quick before we wrap up, Jenny, I think you highlighted something that we'll talk about with the harm reduction. I'll put a pin in it and we'll come back to it. Would love to obviously give all our incredible panelists in the interest of time, because all of us love to talk about this stuff. We were going to do like a 5-minute intermission. We're going to quickly rotate into the next panel. Would love our panelists for panel 2, intersectional harm reduction. Join us up front. Again, let's give them a round of applause. Incredible. Thank you so much. For those of you who like to yes. It's overheating? Okay. Well, we've got the live feed, so we don't need the camera. At the end of the day, we don't have it. We only have part of it. I would say just like what? We'll turn it back on.
You want the audio to be over here.
Okay, the audio's already.
It's already on.
It's already. We're
Pretty good. Okay. You just
So it's still live.
it's gonna be 10 more minutes. But yeah, give it like one to it. Yeah. Good job.
I thought never.
All right. So, if we can all regather, you know, in our seats, those who may have stepped out will come back into the fold, obviously, and join us. But we're going to get started with the second panel. All right. We will have a ton of time to chop it up and talk about all this exciting discussion that we're having. When you go can slide down and make a share as well for now. Okay. So, yes. Do you want to slide down? Yeah.
Wait, share space with us.
All right, folks. We are going to get started. Everyone slide this way a little bit. We're going to get started on our second panel. This one is intersectional harm reduction in psychedelics, compassion, I think protocols, practices, and compassion. Benny is obviously very invested in specifically the psychedelic education and harm reduction space with SPAN. Julian will give a little bit of info about himself. We'll have our two new panelists give a little bit of intro. And Graham has some really interesting thoughts both on mental health patient advocacy in the psychedelic space, as well as illuminating emerging research as part of evolving public education efforts. So, Julian, you want to get us started with the intro?
Sure. Okay, cool. Hi, I'm Julian Fontaine Fox. I'm the other half of Ethnogen London Collective. Yeah, like Monty said earlier, we met via an open circle event, and they are a group that's out here that's a part of getting the community together. I myself am a poet and also a documentarian, and I've been an advocate in the space since like 2010. So, and I finally have with my partner, we have the ability to kind of move off the soapbox, work together to collaborate, and make some actual change, hopefully. Things go well. If anything, we change one person at a time if it's possible. So that's what we're here for.
Well said. Come back. Julian has some really interesting perspectives on cultural erasure and psychedelic implementation spaces, just in general. They're really fascinating. Worth hearing more from. Graham, you and I met at a foraging event in the pouring rain on a Sunday in Jamaica Plain. Almost a year ago now, I think. Over a year ago now. Well over, yeah. Fall of 2023. Tell us a little bit about your journey to the psychedelic advocacy space, as well as your involvement with the Question 4 campaign.
Thank you, Jack. So my journey into this space all has to do with mental illness. So I have obsessive compulsive disorder. I used to have very severe and debilitating obsessive compulsive disorder. And I was totally straight edge. I didn't use cannabis. I didn't drink alcohol. I was not interested in drugs whatsoever. But when my OCD symptoms became very, very severe, a family member recommended medical cannabis to treat anxiety, actually. To treat insomnia, actually, which was very severe. I wasn't sleeping, basically, for months. And when that worked, not just to cure the insomnia, but to really relieve me of the anxiety that I've been struggling with for so much of my adult life, that opened the door for me to this whole world of really transformatively powerful substances that remain stigmatized and criminalized in a lot of the country, including cannabis still in so many states. I did meet Jack over a year ago on a rainy day at a forage event, but it wasn't just a forage event. It was actually the suicide prevention walk through the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention in Boston. And I did that walk with a sign on my body saying, legalize psilocybin to help people with depression. And I was the only one there talking about psilocybin. I think more people in the mental health space should talk about it. This is going on too long for an intro, but I'm all about the mental health angle to this, and the mental health patient and caregiver angle, and I'll talk more about myself later. But that's what's most important.
A thread to circle back on with Graham, and that also for those of you who might be around next month for EK in Boston, but also our free, like this one, all-day community showcase event, Thursday, March 20th. Graham has had some really fascinating experiences and experienced some really interesting benefits from the Amanita muscaria mushroom, which as the Alice in Wonderland stereotypical, you'd think it's a psilocybin mushroom. It's not. It's also like in a weird legal space federally, but anyways, some fascinating stories there, anecdotal testimonial that will blow your mind, but also really speak to the power of informed consent and personal use. Kicking it back over to Janet. Your family originally hails from Taiwan, from my understanding, correct? You also have a previous career in the commercial real estate space. There's a number of different intersectional layers there. Right? Like you've been, interacting with high-powered corporate executives, business owners, folks that might have a lot of stress on their shoulders. There was a recent article a couple of weeks back, I think the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, about C-suite, tech executive ketamine retreats in the Hollywood Hills for like $4,400. Obviously, there's any number of overseas retreats that high-powered, deep-pocketed tech executives, corporate America, individuals who aren't affiliated with some of those organizations but have the money. They're going and experiencing these things in a more high-end scale. There's an interesting juxtaposition there. Immigrant roots, hardworking family, earned every cent of what they have, built a life here, the American dream, as it's been called, as well as being able to integrate that perspective into an industry, and into a community that I'm sure you're involved with to this day in some capacity and tapped into in our friends. How do you bridge that gap? And how is the importance of having that dual perspective?
Yeah, wow, that's a lot there.
I know, yeah.
Wow, okay,
To be continued.
yeah,
Doesn't
yeah,
have to
I'm
be,
trying to think, that's a big question. So, yes, I have a career in real estate, residential real estate,
Mhm.
but I'm
Gotcha, yeah, my bad.
and my background is the business background, so I have master's of business, right? And specifically finance, and so I guess it starts with the story of just kind of how I got to plant medicine, right? So I'm originally from the Bay Area, big fan of Michael Pollan, and I think a lot of people might relate to this story. Very hardworking immigrant roots, my family came, pursued the American dream, and I am the living embodiment of their hopes and dreams, which is crushing. It's easy. And so I picked up the Michael Pollan book, and I didn't even know what the topic was. I just was a fan. Then I thought to myself, wait, am I hearing what I think I am listening to? And my last kind of foray into psychedelics was like in college for fun. And then, after college, you start working hard, you build this life that your family expects you to build. And I think one of the biggest gifts that plant medicine has given me is actually to be able to reconcile that, which is why I am very passionate about having this conversation with other people of color, because just because I look a certain way, there might be some thoughts on what my family origins are. To be honest, though, yes, I'm of Asian descent, but my family, I had no rules growing up. I did not grow up playing piano or going to math lessons and what else people do, playing piano, violin, cello, and then whatever it is that Asian families do. And so every family, everyone's background is very different, right? But what I did discover with the journey of plant medicine is my specific family background, that immigration trauma, that war trauma, that influenced everything about me and why we are here today. I do want to say something about Graham though. So one of the things, so Graham, thank you first of all for being so vulnerable and sharing that about your story, especially the suicide prevention part. I think that is a reflection of the current mental health crisis. And one of the things that my co-founder and I connect on is this mental health crisis and why people are engaging with medicine and why we're so passionate about it being safe. To that end, we have types of events at SAN. Our next event is a QPR, which is question, persuade, and refer, which is suicide gatekeeping. And participants will leave with a certificate. It is the trainer, she is a certified QPR trainer. And so we have these kinds of events because they are tangential to plant medicine, but they also address the reasons why people engage with the medicine. And so we hope you'll sign up. And the trainer is terrific. She is also a fellow psilocybin facilitator graduate from Intertrek. And so we are excited to be able to provide this type of programming.
Sharon. Julian, pivot to you, and for a little bit of background, as to how I first met Julian. Julian again, at a grassroots event at the potluck. We met briefly and then connected a few weeks later. At the EMC's debut event late last spring, Shrooms over in Dorchester here in Boston. Julian gave a really riveting and important speech, background from his life. I'd love him to speak a little bit about it directly, but both about racial identity and cultural erasure based on presenting features, and how one might unknowingly or unwittingly lose a part of their identity based on the conditions of the culture and the society surrounding that portion of their identity that might be less accentuated at first glance. So Julian, do you want to talk a little bit about that and why you think that perspective is all the more important to lead into both intersectional across racial and demographic lines, political boundaries, but also, specifically within the POC community?
Yeah.
You don't have to give.
No. You're good. You're good. They're deep. So
after time, maybe not the full word story for now, but
no, you're good. I'm gonna work through my neurodivergence here.
that's good. I love it.
Okay.
Safe spaces.
So I was born in rural Massachusetts to a mixed father and a white mother, and I grew up primarily in a white space. And white spaces, my father grew up in from Baltimore to upstate New York to living in Roxbury. He came from poverty. My mother also grew up in poverty. I grew up in between an upper middle class spaces and in poverty, and I have family that has spanned through that space as well. My identity was often, I was thought of as being Jewish, trying a curly-headed kid with ambiguous, features. You don't know who or what you are until you meet your family, right? And I was introduced to the Black side of my identity from an early age at 5 years old. But when you're consistently told by kids, or you're the adults that are in your space or look partly like you don't really know who you are as a person, and you're trying to figure that. And I was trying to figure that out as me throughout a lot of that time. I'm also queer. I'm also polyamorous. Like my intersections are kind of all over the place, right? So, through time, I got to a point where, because of a very tumultuous stepfather relationship, where I became very numb within myself, and I didn't all that joy and love that I had was kind of sucked out of me. And eventually it got to a point where I no longer wanted to live anymore. And I saw my brother, my half brother, who's my dad's their son, and he was like 2, and I saw him and I was like, can't take my life. You know, I gotta live for him. And then the next year I found psychedelics, psilocybin, and that had novel experience. I realized, oh my God, I'm connected to everything. I can't, and I also need to meet people where they're at, which is like for somebody with a disorder, is like kind of tough, you know, and also ADHD is like a motherfucker. So part of my French, I don't know if I can swear. Did it, yeah. So at any rate, time goes on, and eventually my aunt, who's an amazing artist, her name's Jenny Vineyard, she does intersectional art work that's centered around her ethnicity. She's also biracial, black and white, but very light skinned, and deals a lot with her identity in the way that she grew up in a very similar area that I did in Massachusetts. And eventually she found her community. She went to Yale, she went through her photography, and she ended up developing this very deep Black community for herself, and was in Los Angeles, invited me out there. This was like 2019. And for 2 weeks, this is like before everything popped off with like COVID and everything like that, she was like, gave me like a fast track, like, this is Blackness, and this is how you own this, and this is the privilege that you have as being a very light-skinned Black person, and that you don't need to be accepted by every single person. They're not everyone that needs to see you. But what it did was it reminded me that I am everything, right? And I don't need to be seen in every space. And in fact, you know, it led me to that summer having a conversation with my father during the whole, George Floyd moment, right? Black Lives Matter, really having that, and him being like, whoa, I don't know, this whole Black Lives Matter thing, white lives matter, all lives matter. And it's like, all lives matter, fuck, Dad, goddamn. So, he's like a long-term substance user, right? And I knew all about his background and how he moved through his life. And it's his story to tell, so I won't go too deep into that detail, but leave it to say, we did some mushrooms together and we tripped for like 3 hours. And by the end of it, he was like, no, you're right, Black lives do matter. And I'm like, yeah, Dad, duh, what are you talking about? How did we figure this out on these mushrooms, dog? Like, we got there, dude. Like, Jesus. So, the whole process has been this thing of like throughout my life using substance and knowing that I have to not just be like on a soapbox, but I'm also there as an advocate, and that I'm a representation of myself in the larger community as a whole. So, I found Amani at an open circle event, and we were like, man, this fucking space is white. You see all the white people around here? I'm like, I know I'm white looking, but like, yes, where are my black people at? And so when we found each other, gravitated to each other, she was wearing that same exact cowboy hat. And I was like, yes, you, girl, I need to hang out with you. And we started talking and really got into like what was missing in the space. And that was people that look like us. And slowly but surely, we started finding out that, holy shit, we're not the only ones. We in fact found out that there are folks that started a whole event before us in 2016 that were ethnogen based and were really about that space. And I, for one, want to carry that mantle forward, right? I don't, erasure is so real. In the Black community, if you're not Black enough, you don't count. In the white community, if you are of color, then you're thought to be something else. No one thinks that you're related to anybody else. It's like, dude, we're just human fucking beings. We're all just trying to do our best here. And yeah, we should gather up together and work together and make those POC spaces our table of our own. That's not my thought. That is coming from an amazing documentary that is out there for the world, and the only way to take power is to make a table for yourself, whether you're queer, whether you're a woman, whether you're of color, maybe it's all of those things, but make it, and then you can be the master of your future, right? And then remember, autonomy is scary. Once you have it, it takes a lot of responsibility to hold on to it. So don't be afraid of it, but get people together, make a community, tell your stories, and support one another.
Also, we'll pivot to Graham here in a second. Quick anecdote about Julian's conversations and explorations surrounding cultural erasure. Honestly, I wanted to highlight because I was deeply moved by it on, wanting to highlight that perspective. But Julian, you and I have had conversations regarding this. None of this is supposed to be about me talking about myself. My grandfather is passed away, but was born and raised in Colorado, the Dominican Republic, earned his citizenship fighting in World War II, enlisted in the U.S. Army at 18, and my mother grew up in the Caribbean. I joke with a lot of my Hispanic friends. I look full gringo, very aware I'm not fluent. With my mother's greatest regrets is not teaching their kids Spanish or English. I recommend bilingual folks. Yeah, anyways, really moved me and opened my eyes because I hadn't really thought about any of the parts of my family that lives in San Domingo. And this is obviously just beyond psychedelics, but all of this is tied back to harm reduction in education. The more that we can identify intersectional pathways to getting more people in the room talking about different perspectives related to any of these substances, any of these movements, anything that's progressive gets a bad rep as a term in certain local circles, but anything that's forward-minded in terms of real substantive, tangible improvements to our society from a healthcare reform perspective. And so the cultural erasure part of this conversation as we expand both like interracial and build more and more corners and pockets and and safe places within this coalition for those advocates like yourself, folks in the POC spaces. I think it's just I'm incredibly grateful to you personally for opening my eyes and opening my heart to a perspective that I hope we can continue to expand on as the leaders of tomorrow in terms of American the generational turnover are not going to look like me. They're not all going to be straight white dudes eventually. Promise.
That's true, white dude.
Yeah.
FYI. It might be straight, but not white dude. Completely.
Yes, I am straight. Anyways, Graham, pivoting to you. Okay, so you want to take the mic?
Yeah.
All right, awesome. Fantastic. So one of the things that I think is really unique about Graham's perspective, first of all, if you have any questions about what kind of research might exist in the psychedelic ecosystem, this guy is a walking encyclopedia. It is remarkable. He's taught me more about the ongoing science and the historical research is there. Anyways, you have a really interesting perspective on, how mental health patients like yourself, vulnerable to share with us that you both neurodivergent, ADHD, but diagnosed
But
with
like
OCD.
everybody's made themselves vulnerable.
Exactly. Yes, absolutely. Again, but the perspective that we don't often hear, right? You mentioned tapering SSRIs and interactions with certain psychedelics and certain pharmaceutical medications and informing people in those spaces. You have both a couple of interesting examples of research that indicates that educating yourself surrounding responsible use of pharmaceutical intermingling, that there's room left to grow in terms of how we educate and what we really know, but also just how do we, much like veterans, how do we put the agency in the hands of mental health patients rather than having large organizations speak for them or advocate on their behalf without their direct input. So can you speak a little bit to both your unique perspective on mental health patient advocacy and agency, as well as how that impacts the harm reduction and education conversation?
I'll try. So the one thing that I think is really important is I don't think my perspective is that unique. I think, unfortunately, it's underrepresented in the public discussion, but it's not that unique based on the many conversations I've had with mental health patients and caregivers in the last 2 years since I really got involved in the advocacy. Just for people at home or in the audience who don't know, I was the lead educator on the Question 4 campaign. I was staff, and then before that, I was a grassroots volunteer alongside Jamie Morey and others in this space as a volunteer advocate, and now I'm actually working with Jamie on mass healing. I think it's very unfortunate and ironic. There are a lot of good reasons to decriminalize and legalize plant medicine that other people have mentioned here, but the one that has been the most politically and culturally compelling has been that this helps people with mental illness, particularly veterans, but also people dealing with end-of-life anxiety and others. And yet, pretty much the entire discussion has been basically talking for those people or on behalf of those people, and often putting forward policies where those people's actual real life concerns are kind of put last. I was very happy to work on behalf of question 4 because I am in favor of everybody who's an adult being able to make an informed decision to use plant medicine. But that policy, the way it was written, if you work backwards from what was actually in the bill, it was about normalizing psychedelics culturally and making them available to everybody. It wasn't really about helping mental health patients like myself or my loved ones. Another important part of my biography is I've been a caregiver for 2 loved ones with severe suicidal depression, including my best friend who died by suicide when I was 21. And people with serious mental illness, they don't have a lot of money. So that's just one thing. They can't really afford these boutique, very expensive psychedelic treatments that are available in Oregon. And that's one thing. Another thing is that a lot of them require taking psilocybin more than just once or twice. I think ibogaine, anecdotally, the research really does reflect the fact that when ibogaine treatment can be truly transformative. And while I believe that certain people taking mushrooms once or twice can be really impactful, I have yet to meet in real life a single person with serious mental illness who has one and done mushrooms. Generally, people use psilocybin. It can be very transformative. I think it can have a curative effect, but they often take it, if not weekly or daily, monthly or on a yearly basis. And so if your only option to do that is going into one of these centers like in Oregon, that's just completely unfeasible.
Yeah.
And people will and do go to the street. I did. That was my route. You know, I bought mushrooms illegally. I used them in my home, and that really worked for me. And what I truly needed, and what people like me truly needed, was for that to not be criminal. And so the reason I cared about question 4 was because of the decriminalization. But what we really could have benefited from, and I think people were ready for, was something like a medical cannabis model for psilocybin.
Yeah.
Because the safe supply is key. I'm going on and on.
Okay.
But one really key thing that I want to communicate on this live stream, which people might not really be aware of and was important to me, New Approach PAC, which advanced the ballot measure, did an internal poll prior to deciding on the policy they advanced. And what was really painful for me to read in that poll was that home cultivation for everybody was the second least popular policy plank that they polled. It was only slightly more popular than letting people under 21 use psychedelics. But take home, actually, letting people use mushrooms at home for people with diagnoses had like super majority support. I know that's exaggeration, but something like 60% support. The policies that actually would have benefited people polled better than the policies that were ultimately advanced in the ballot measure in this internal poll. So we went with something more politically risky that would legalize use for recreational users, which again, I'm in favor for personally. But the dilemma was it was a real stretch culturally, and Massachusetts wasn't ready for it, or at least we weren't able to make the argument. But I think if we'd gone for something that really would have put patients first, we could have won, and that's what's really hard for me to think about.
Yeah, we'll talk more about, a little bit of both, looking back on what worked well, what didn't, in our third panel for both like question 4 campaign. Even though they're not here, we'll touch on the Connecticut folks and what's the latest with them. They'll be back in March, for March 20th for all this showcase, which is great. Trying to think, I just, in general, Graham, I think one, thank you for your perspective. Two, to your point, there's a number of different emerging areas of psychedelic research that by scientific method, high-level academia, FDA approval caliber standards in terms of breadth and total quantity of research, we're not quite there yet, but we're finally, because of renewed interest at the federal and state level, private industry, and investing in research, we're able to see, beyond just anecdotal, there's potential benefit, psilocybin at lower non-hallucinogenic doses or non-psychedelic doses for osteoarthritis, or plaque psoriasis and certain skin conditions, chronic stress and chronic pain, autoimmune disorders. Jamie Morey would encourage everybody to talk to her about PANS Panda and some of the other autoimmune and neuroinflammatory disorders that we're seeing psychedelics have real potential benefit for. Mentioned ibogaine. Folks, anybody who's watching psychedelics today is probably aware of this, but for those of you who are in person who aren't, former Texas Governor Rick Perry, along with an individual based out of Kentucky, but it's a longtime ibogaine advocate, in Brian Hubbard. Earlier this year, went on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast, like him or love him. It's a very listened to platform. It's a very big deal. We had, two conservatives from conservative states talking about the potential of ibogaine therapy for any number of different issues, medically. Parkinson's, early onset dementia, potential Alzheimer's, the potential beyond just the strictly mental health conversation. It's important, but we're missing, to Graham's point, I'll highlight a couple of studies here in a second. We're missing that next level discourse, digging in a little bit deeper to further practical applications of plant medicine beyond a legalized therapeutic framework. And to your point, you mentioned the polling surrounding home grow. There are 8 cities across the state of Massachusetts where personal possession, and by extension, by law, in terms of law enforcement interest in actually going after people, home cultivation is more protected legally in these 8 cities than anywhere else in the state and in a lot of other places on the planet, right? So it's interesting. There's an added legal protection to localized municipal resolutions that, while not protected by state law, potentially, again, I'm not a lawyer, not a medical professional, but could intertwine. So looking to next gen solutions for policy crafting is something we'll get to. Move back to Julian, specifically, to, you mentioned beyond just the cultural erasure that we spoke about sooner, a little bit earlier, some of the other areas of your intersectional identity. What are some of the most important conversations that you've had in that LGBTQ plus community, as well as, a lot of people are exploring psychedelics for relationship healing, therapy. How does that fit into, the polyamory, and gender, LGBTQ community at large? How might that help shape intersectional education or conversation efforts? We've seen misinformation in the medical community run rampant in LGBT, Q plus communities and lead to, death, harm, immense hurt. How can the psychedelics movement learn from those mistakes and do better? Again, all broader questions will be.
No, you're fine. It's just my reaction. This is how my face looks. So again, I'll start with this. I'm not a monolith. We're not a monolith. So my answer is not, I can't state like, for the entirety of the queer community, this is how we should approach X. So I'll just go from my own perspective on that. It's more of a human thing than it is like a specific to, whatever your gender is or whatever your sexual preference or whatever. It's about, okay, here we go. Elon Musk, right? Let's just say, for instance, he uses psychedelics. Still a douche. So there's no technical term that, correct, thank you. Jenny's a scientist. Of douchery. So there's no, but like, here's the thing, like you can't guarantee that someone's gonna have a positive outcome where they're gonna heal from this stuff. It's not just what it comes down to is your integration. The reason, so specifically to the Black and brown melanated community, which I feel more attuned to answering for, is to say, we need each other to feel and create a safe space. And the same goes for the LGBTQIA plus community. Look at the erasure that's happening right now due to executive orders from the Trump douchery committee administration. I just like the word. I just been so mad lately. But try not to be mad about that. Move forward. So it's more about how do we collectively work together to heal what is happening at all times. We're under direct attack in so many different angles as citizens in this country, and some of us may not feel that way. And again, we're not a monolith, so maybe y'all are like, yeah, let's go. I love what's going on. I don't know, but what I do know is that if you're not feeling okay and you need something that's an alternative, trying a substance like psilocybin, like DMT, like ibogaine, if you can get your hands on it, possibly, or you're a part of some clinical study in Canada, or you know a guy, maybe there's a local shaman. I don't know. These things are happening, but like, you know, you can read in Vice, you can read in Double Blind, a lot of it is speaking about being formed.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
You can't move, like to Jenny's point, like to make any of this operate, you have to be educated. And again, how do you educate? You got to find your community. You got to come to events like this. You gotta be interested in it. So many people I talk to random coworkers at work. Most of them don't care. They're just there for their 9 to 5.
Yeah.
They're like, I don't have time. I got 2 kids. I got to work 3 jobs. I don't have time to even go on a date. You want me to talk to you about psychedelics? I don't even know, man. Or some of these folks, you know, are from the 60s or the 70s or the 80s and the 90s. They grew up in the crack epidemic. And they don't have anything but a reference of just say no, or you're going to be arrested and be put in jail for the rest of your life. How unfair is that? Tell me where there's justice in that. It's not about being gay or a lesbian or bisexual or transsexual or being Black or any of the things. It's about just human compassion and equanimity that we're trying to manifest in this world. And if we don't help one another, we're not going to be helped at all. You got to start by helping yourself. And sometimes you need someone to lift you up in order to do that. And these substances can help to provide a platform to do that. They also might spin you into some like egomaniacal friggin' person. There's no guarantees. It's a roll of the dice. But if you're not going to try, what the fuck are we doing? You got to try to put an effort out.
Yeah, and to that point, one, powerful words. Very much appreciate all of your passion and perspective, Julian. An important voice, undoubtedly, in this space, New England and beyond. But we live in an age where there's emerging research. There's research that's existed, there's been research being conducted, you know, for decades in other nations. We want to be able to move it. This is where I'd love to pivot to Jenny, and we'll, in the interest of time, do one shortened question line back in this direction, more and transition to our final panel. We want to be able to do more with the information we have than just leave people to roll the dice, right? We want to be able to, you know, for example, have folks be properly informed about whether or not tapering a certain pharmaceutical medication in conjunction with or prior to potential psychedelic use, whether that's right for them. We want to be able to provide research that, you know, we'll pivot back to Graham here in a bit before we close about psilocybin interactions with certain SSRIs. It indicates for some folks it might not be, you know, that's risky, but nonetheless, how do we inform folks? You know, so how do we take all of the emerging research that's, you know, coming out in real time and best compact that to a more effective and broad-ranging harm reduction education process?
Yeah, that's a great question, because research is, you know, research is slow and fast. That's the kind of the irony of it, right? I don't know that I have the answer on how to best package this information because there's so much of it. But I would start with, and this is where Bree and I are very passionate, because we are both trained by a legitimate, facilitator training program. We're very passionate about evidence and education-based information, right? There's so, especially in this political environment, so thank you, Julie, for bringing that up, that, there could be the fake news, right? That used to be the thing, like everything's fake news. It's hard to tell what's real news anymore. And the real news is kind of scarier. I wish real news were the fake news. Again, I do think it's vetting, the outlets that you're consuming from, right? Double blind is good, psychedelic back support is good. There's a number of great vetted resources out there. In terms of, organizations like SPAN, we are not saying you have to taper. And in fact, psilocybin is one of those medicines where you do not have to taper. It might, being on a psychotropic might blunt some effects, but it's not dangerous, because there is a rumor, oh my gosh, serotonin syndrome. Is that true? Yes, it can be true with MDMA. But with psilocybin and a psychotropic, the risk is quite low, actually, right? And science proves that out, right?
Yeah.
And then Graham mentioned like access, end of life, terminal diagnosis, end of life anxiety. We recently had Chris Conwell from the End of Life Psychedelic Care give a webinar on Wednesday, and she went through the slew of research that is currently ongoing. You can go to, clinicaltrials.gov, and you can see what is out there. That's a pretty good resource. So really staying open, but also really being careful about what you consume. I'm going to go on a limb there. I'm not on social, but SPAN is. But probably what you're getting on Facebook, and that you're on, Ethel is sending you, probably not the best place. Ethel might be super smart. I don't know. Ethel could be a scientist.
Yeah.
If that's the case, believe her. But really just be mindful about what you take in, because what we're taking in is, the social media, we are absorbing that, whether we really are conscious about that or not, and we are absorbing that. So really just be mindful of legitimate outlets and, watching what you put in your psyche as much as your body.
Yeah, e-literacy is obviously more pressing, I guess, intellectual deficiencies of our time, unfortunately. So much of the system works in a direction that perpetuates that. I think it's also really important to note that, as many folks in the cannabis industry know, social media being the predominant format so many of us are getting our news and information is even more problematic for plant medicine, community members in general, because the algorithms are so discriminatory and, ban content. I bet if you threw, a rocket here, you might hit at least two people. I could throw a rocket at you, but you know what I'm saying? That, that have been affected by social media censorship of well-intentioned harm reduction content. So, yes, on Gail's conspiracy theory, Facebook group stuff, we need to do better in informing, and also understanding how downstream of that pipeline that incentivizes polarity, how do we improve the downstream filtering out of that nonsense while also engaging with these platforms that we're fighting upstream to get really great information out there. But nonetheless, I understand, because it's Safer Psychedelic Association, because, psychedelics is the name of the handle. I don't think you guys have run into any shadow banning stuff yet. And for me with psychedelic stuff, it's very noticeable when the algorithm's not cool with what I posted that day. It would mention psychedelics too prominently. So obviously I want to come back, to, but I think it's worth noting, yes, social media is problematic. Also, it's what we're stuck with. Teaming up, resource sharing, coalition building to kind of do our very best to combat that algorithmic discrimination. Very exciting stuff in the works there here in New England with some groups. We'll talk about that in a second. Pivoting back to Julian, and then we'll go some closing thoughts as well. Julian, we talked a lot about the sheer amount of information. You use the term downloaded. A lot of people in the space do. Well, obviously, in terms of the sheer amount of information, realizations that come from whether it's a psychedelic experience like the one you had your jab, or a 3-hour time, completely different and evolved perspective that have a bit more compassion, one of our themes of this panel. But first, 1 sentence summary of what integration is, if you can, as well as how you'd like to see integration standards and pathways to integration services improved for marginalized members of this community, like those in the POC and LGBTQ, et cetera.
Okay, what is integration? It is when you end up going through a lived experience, and this is whether it's psychedelic or it's just your lived experience, and you are suddenly asking questions that you didn't have before in your mind's eye, and you want to have some sort of an answer on how to get there. So to integrate, there are forms like, say, through therapy, or you're communing with sport or storytelling and sharing. It could be through meditation. There's many different ways to get to that integrated space. But what it is it's an emotional space, it's a physicalized space, it's a mental space, it's a spiritual space. Those things are all what we are trying to contain within these like human vessels that we have. What I would like to see, partly it's a decriminalized model, partly it's an educational model. And in my ideal, in Amani and I's ideal space, we have an integration home. Say it's like grandma's house, and it's a house that's in, we'll just throw out some random neighborhood in Dorchester, and you're able to come there, and there is it's led by, say, a psychiatric mental health nurse. There are facilitators. There are group therapy sessions or group sessions where you're just sharing. This is it. And then there's one-on-ones where you're just sharing. And there's also the availability to do the substance potentially as things were to be decriminalized and accessibility and such. If you had a bad trip, there would be people who would be sent out to pick you up. They would either sit with you while you trip, or if you were able to come to the facility and be there. There's outdoor availability, there's indoor availability, there's art, there's music, there's gathering, there's dance. There's all sorts of space to be able to facilitate in that way. That is my ideal way of handling that and moving that forward, moving that needle forward. That's what I would pitch to any sitting representative of the state or of Congress federally, or however we would move that thing forward, because we are lacking that when you don't have a safe space to do these things. Maybe you're in a neighborhood where it's not as dangerous to do that in. Maybe you live with your folks. Maybe you don't have just the ability to even gain access to safe things. And this would be also a space that would have clean needles, right?
Yeah.
In exchange. So if you have people who can have oversight over the space, that know medically what to do and how to do it, and also are there to help you to go, maybe there's chaplaincy, maybe there's the religious aspect of it, right? The philosophization of it. There's so many elements that we need to download when we're trying to integrate, and that's what we should be facilitating for one another.
Well said. Thank you. Yeah, it's a good, I guess, a third point to close with, Graham. One, a lot has been talked about tonight as far as like psilocybin in particular. I think it's important to note, and this is a good segue to Graham highlighting some studies, some research that you might want to be aware of. He's going to be on an emerging trends in psychedelic research and therapies panel at UCAN in Boston. For those of you who be in attendance, definitely come on by. It's great. It's a phenomenal co-panelist with him on there as well. Psilocybin has an incredibly low risk profile. Again, I am not a medical professional. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not, yeah, exactly. But I am correct, right? Like, pretty much remarkably so. Yes, it is a psychedelic-inducing substance compound that is common in a mushroom, but the actual risk of addiction is non-existent. And actually, like, your tolerance goes up to the chemical process that I could butcher the name of, right? I know it. That it's just not something you could be addicted to. You can overdose on psilocybin. Again, serotonin, syndrome or type 1 toxicity possibilities like you might have with MDMA or LSD. Yeah, and I think another very quick segue to Graham's closing thought. The intersectional nature of some research. I mentioned fibromyalgia, osteoarthritis. There's, from a pharmaceutical angle, there's an LSD psychedelic pharmaceutical being studied by a company called MindMed. It's actually based here in Boston. They just entered, I think it's phase 2 or maybe phase 3. I think it's phase 2 clinical trials for LSD for anxiety, just for generalized anxiety disorder. Right, we're looking at a first wave of psychedelic pharmaceuticals that would be geared towards severe. Yeah, there's psilocybin. There's a bunch of really interesting stuff going on there. That like the first wave will be largely PTSD, memory, depression, severe mental illness focused. The second wave is where things get really interesting. Well, again, this stuff happened over a long period of time, but just very excited to see the research evolve. So, Graham, we've talked a lot about how harm reduction in the mental health advocacy and mental illness space can be improved. But what are some studies that you think indicate, or worth keeping an eye on as far as legitimizing safety of psychedelic use, in the mental health patient disorder, et cetera, space? And how can those of us who aren't familiar better educate ourselves about how to have agency for mental health, mentally ill patients in the psychedelic community?
So thank you, Jack. Unfortunately, I'm not in fact a walking encyclopedia, so I can't just list off studies like
Very modest as well.
like Mike Rust and Suits or something. But what I can do is provide a big picture view based on a pretty thorough look into the research. So I really care about doing things right, and before I felt comfortable advocating for question 4 as vigorously as I did, I really wanted to know whether the decrim for everybody was indeed smart from a public health perspective. And to that end, I talked to a lot of people and also did quite a bit of research. And I was particularly interested in the risks that classic psychedelics, particularly psilocybin, potentially would pose to people with bipolar disorder and schizophrenia. I had a friend in high school who had their whole life derailed temporarily. They're doing fine now from schizophrenia. And I have another person in my community who suffers from mania and only through the grace of God have their manic run-ins with law enforcement not led to them being in jail, like so many others have happened. So I didn't want to hurt those people, and yet a lot of the people who were opposed to decriminalization or legalization of these substances would keep trying to pit mental health patients and caregivers against each other, essentially saying that the people pushing for psilocybin to be available were basically throwing these other people under the bus. And while I think the big picture view is if you have a manic or psychotic disorder, for people who don't know what mania is for most people, a manic episode is going to look a lot like psychosis. It is a break from reality that looks a little bit different from what we consider to be psychosis and schizophrenia. It's a break from reality that severely impairs functioning. If you have a manic or psychotic disorder, experimenting with drugs poses a high risk because you have, by baseline, a higher chance of having a break from reality. So it is not true that it's just as safe for somebody with schizophrenia or bipolar to use psilocybin as it is for somebody who does not have one of those disorders. However, the comparative risks of, say, psilocybin versus alcohol versus cannabis for somebody with schizophrenia or bipolar, psilocybin is not that risky, or at least I'm saying that very, very, probably too much authority in my voice. It appears to not be that risky. The jury is still out. I think that in the popular culture, there is this sense that if somebody with schizophrenia is to take magic mushrooms or something, it's like shooting themselves in the head, and that's just not true. And in fact, there's some very preliminary research being done in a lab in Alabama that points to psilocybin actually potentially being beneficial for people with schizophrenia in terms of increasing their insight, their ability to distinguish between psychotic symptoms and reality, which is really, really great. Now, that doesn't mean that I would feel comfortable recommending psilocybin to any person with a psychotic disorder outside of a controlled setting. But it does mean that in combination with all the observational research we have that doesn't show availability of psilocybin and classic psychedelics being correlated with an increase in say, psychotic illness, that it's not as dangerous as many people believe. And what has happened, which happened to us in this state, where mental health professionals try to say that the pro-psychedelics people are not caring about people with serious mental illness, it's not based on the evidence, and it's really inappropriate that mental health patients have hit against each other in this way.
Yeah.
And I just want to close just this intersectionality panel that it's really important, I think, for this, as we move forward with the psychedelic renaissance, whatever people want to call it, that mental health patients stop being sort of an afterthought. The research done clinically on mental health patients is the whole reason we're here. It's not just this talk about expanding consciousness or the libertarian idea that you just build what you want, although I'm on board with both of those. But the reason people are even considering decriminalizing and legalizing is because of the medical research. But people don't seem to care what the people who participate in those studies really want. People who are in the FDA MDMA trials, this is all anecdotal, but I suspect the majority of those people would like MDMA to be available for other people in need who are really suffering. And I myself have participated in multiple psychological psychiatric studies. I've talked to different researchers at different universities, and I've been really struck with how unconcerned they've been about my personal use. And I think that's another key thing that people just don't really know because they're not in that world. Like, I've talked to people at Yale, I've talked to people at University of Arizona and in this university in Australia, and nobody's ever like, oh my God, like we want to study you, but you know, you're using psilocybin, you have OCD, and it's not instead of having 5 different people watch you, you don't have your spacesuit on. Nobody's ever said that to me. The only thing that anybody's ever cautioned me about is the theoretical risk of a heart issue related to microdosing. And I could go on where the research is on that because we've yet to have even a single case report. Oh, sorry, this is going to the depth. This goes to the depth. Thank you for having me, Jack. I can talk forever, but
Hilarious to me that Graham opened that final closing comment with, "I am not a walking encyclopedia." I stand by my assessment. So keep your seats. We're going to very quickly transition to the third panel. Because our 2 Connecticut folks are not here, it'll be a shorter panel anyways. I'll briefly touch on the start once we're settled. We'll give it a couple minutes. If you want to stretch your legs, do that. We'll transition into the third panel slowly. More to come soon. We'll show that. The first one, Bruce. What? So you need figure it out. Yes. So there's I just had a we haven't been quite connected yet. So I do know of It's really shorter, like 20 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly, exactly. You don't have to, right. You know, if you, you don't want to take anything.
All right. We're starting to move back towards our seats.
Yeah.
For those of you that might have friends who stepped out, I'll let them know. All right.
Yeah, yeah, not a.
Okay, do you want all right. We're waiting on Jamie Morey and come back from all right. Jamie is coming up around the corner. Okay. All right. So we're going to family heads. As I mentioned earlier, our two scheduled panelists, Victor Costanza and Aaron Doolittle, two founding members of Connecticut for Accessible Psychedelic Medicine. They were not able to join us tonight. Car troubles, something that we all relate to. They will be here for the March 20th showcase. So really recommend if you're interested in the Connecticut movement and the latest developments. We did a really great panel via Psychedelics Today, our amazing live stream partners, late last year, kind of breaking down what went wrong with Q4 and what comes next to Connecticut and what they can learn. Victor and Aaron are fantastic. For the sake of, we'll jump right into the panel for the sake of a very brief summary of the latest in Connecticut for representation's sake. Connecticut is obviously an interesting landscape for cannabis, the cannabis industry, very MSO or like corporate private money dominated in terms of ownership and stake in the marketplace on the state level. The Attorney General recently spoke about this on Psychedelics Today on a live stream last week. Attorney General of Connecticut, William Tong. While Connecticut has significant interest in reforming and refining, cannabis laws, as well as multiple different attempts over the last few years to bring about psychedelic policy reform efforts at the state level as well. William Tong most recently gave the keynote speech at a DC for an organization called Smart Approaches to Marijuana, SAM for short. For those of you who don't know, the name is a bit of a misleading. They are very staunchly a prohibitionist organization committed to restricting cannabis use under the guise of, I don't know, a bunch of nonsense, cherry-picked public health data. I digress. Connecticut's an interesting place. Two different bills were filed at the state level this year, both of which have stalled out, but not due to a lack of constituent or legislator interest. They have strong co-sponsors, as well as interest from state legislators that's been documented by at least 5 or 6 other state lawmakers. And yet there are calls and emails to the committee chair, co-chairs who are in charge of deciding whether or not their health committee in Connecticut will actually have a conversation about the bill formally. They're not returning their emails. They're leaving them on red. And again, not for a lack of substantive interest from the voters who have elected these officials to enact their will. So with that, we're going to jump right in. Graham, let's start with you. Both as the educational outreach director of the Question for campaign, and as someone who's worked in the political advocacy space with progressive policy issues here in New England in previous years, what are you most excited about coming out of the historic 12 bills being filed by the end of January, related to psychedelics on Beacon Hill. And is there a bill or, of those individual filings that excite you particularly, that whether they'll be passed this year or not, or next year or the year after, are important for expanding the conversation? Again, in your opinion.
So I think what I'm really excited about is the real possibility that we might actually pass something in Massachusetts. So for people who haven't been following this closely, there were 3 pilot program bills that were introduced and sponsored by 3 different legislators. And two of those legislators are quite influential in the Massachusetts legislature. And one of them is in the leadership of an important committee. That's Senator Cindy Friedman. So Cindy Friedman did not endorse question 4, but she has introduced a very serious proposal to create a pilot program for psychedelics as a mental health treatment in Massachusetts. And the indications are that's a really serious initiative on her part, and that has a real chance of being passed into law. Not saying it's likely, but I think at this point, I'm very excited for anything to move forward and legitimize psychedelics as medicine, which I think they are, or should be. In addition to that, I'm very excited in terms of the conversation, and I'd love for it to be passed into law, although realistically the chances are low, of a bill that I developed in collaboration with my representative.
Was that step rest again?
Stephen Owens. And also a Massachusetts psychiatrist and 2 members of the Psychedelic Pharmacists Association, April and Ronnie. I wish I knew how to pronounce both their last names, but Ronnie and April were really, really great. And this bill would essentially decriminalize psilocybin use for people with qualifying conditions as defined by clinical trial evidence. And the way that we thought about this was something that met the culture where it's at, in terms of not simply decriminalizing all adult use, but also doing the right thing in terms of making use like that myself and people I know no longer a criminal thing, which is really important for me because that's sort of my true north in all this. Yeah. I used to be not even really able to take a walk because my OCD was so bad. I was basically almost bedbound. And now I live this free life, even if I don't use psilocybin for months or whatever. And that shouldn't be a crime. It's absurd. It's absurd that it is a crime. It is a crime. I would want to say it was a crime, but it is because we live in this absurd society. So that bill is really important to me, even if I don't know if it'll pass. Oh, and I should mention it, and this wasn't an afterthought. This was intentional, thanks to sort of Sarko Jajarian, a really important advocate in this space, is in the audience tonight. He's a police officer in Massachusetts. It actually decriminalizes the use of veterans and law enforcement officers as well. Right. And I think that's important as well. So I'll end with that. So I'm really excited about that. But anything passing, and I think Cindy Friedman's bill or something like it has a good shot.
Yeah. Okay, we want to pivot on down to you. Brent talked a little bit about these pilot programs, 3 different pilot programs that it bills. For the sake of a very quick definition, a pilot program is state appropriated, state level appropriated funding, usually approved, time to go through a bill like this. It's a small amount of funding for essentially like a test run, gather data surrounding what regulated supervised psilocybin assisted or psychedelic assisted therapy looks like. Usually partnered with healthcare provider, MDH, Mass General Hospital here has a phenomenal neuroscience and psychedelics department. There's a number of others that are fantastic. But what that also kind of leads us towards, right? It's a pilot program. So it's a test run, but it's also setting a standard potentially for a predominantly medicalized model that ultimately, and this is something, I wish we'd been able to talk more about intersectional, could, restrict accessibility by way of financial barriers, by way of, certain eligibility. If it's veteran and, treatment resistant depression and PTSD focused, that's great. But what about the folks with OCD? What about the folks with anxiety? What about the folks with bipolar disorder? A smaller, dose of psilocybin might be beneficial. Who knows, right? So, Kate, how, in terms of how this policy conversation evolves, both from your work witnessing, in cannabis legalization efforts in an attempt to be incredibly pragmatic, what can we pass now? How can we temper the pass something now, increase access, get the wave moving with an awareness of potential long-term drawbacks from a hyper pragmatic approach to policy reform?
Great question. So I think we're straddling a line between this medicalized market and this more democratized model, which is really based off personal consumption and your own very personal relationship, whether it's cultural or religious, spiritual, or just recreational. I think all of that is very healing. And I think the problem with a lot of these models is you have people that are supposedly trusted members of society. I'm naming doctors, research scientists, the people that are very vocal and very anti a lot of these resolutions. If you took a chance to read that beautiful little red packet that they send out right before the questions went out, I took a few minutes to read the note, and it was written by the Director of Education for the MGH Psychedelic Research Clinic. So who else doesn't want you to have this access except the people that are profiting from these bottles? So honestly, it pisses me off that a lot of people find it so easy to just accept, like, oh, they're a doctor, of course they know. Yeah. But these are profitable models. This is millions of dollars a year that are implemented into these systems currently. And again, it's not to say that there's not a time and place for this, but there's access, and there's a lot of limitations to people being able to gain access to that. Currently, what we've been seeing is a lot of studies done by these larger institutions. Johns Hopkins is a great example of that, specifically with the psilocybin studies. And again, very restrictive. You have to have a very specific condition. You have to have had, like, say, smoking cessation or treatment-resistant depression, and had years of different types of treatments before they'll even talk to you. So for a lot of people, maybe they've been going through this on their own through their communities, to some points that were made earlier, maybe even auntie, not a therapist that you're paying a copay. That's all very much support, mental health support. And I think that the best thing that we can do is continue to try to make change at a local level. Tip O'Neill, a guy from Boston, who's a few bridges named after him, is very famous for saying all politics is local. And the older I've gotten, the more I realize that really, as much as you can call these people at the state level, you can call these people at the federal level, send emails, protest, wear a red shirt on Friday, whatever. Like, yes, that is all very much a part of this. However, you do need to show up at your local meetings. You do need to be able to, propose new initiatives or get involved in grassroots advocates who are the ones that are able to show up at these meetings and share your insights. And I think that, again, the reason why the resolutions were fairly successful is because we didn't say we need this done by the end of the year. We took our time and we said we're willing to wait and talk with you and treat you like a respected individual and explain to you why this is really important to us, and we're not going to go away. So I'm not this highly emotional person who's coming out screaming at you, saying you need this, you need that. But I am willing to have a conversation, a hard series of conversations with people that really kind of deconstruct what their notion of the government is, what their notion of the use of different services, whether it's mental health and the whole conversation we're having with police departments, with social services. Working in cannabis, I worked with a number of these organizations to help educate them on the program, because unfortunately, the people that do the most educating to these people are the ones that are then victimized. Yeah. So they're having to stand up for themselves at that moment. So I think the more we can do to try to educate these bodies that interact with people, and again, whether it's law enforcement getting in touch with, some of these great programs that are helping advocate for a bit more awareness of what the mental health crisis might look like and getting them access to appropriate follow-up services, but just as well taking it completely out of their hands. Like deprioritizing is a good first step. Although, again, it is a deprioritization. This is not a legalization. Yeah. This is in DC. We're not able to walk around and just get what we want. But it is saying we're really trying to prioritize what we think is important, which are more victim-based crimes, rather than getting and interfere with people's personal politics and things that help them. Yeah. Because again, to the point of, is this a crime? Like you said, who's the victim? Like, are you a victim because your quality of life was increased? You're a productive member of society. Going from a place of being homebound to having a meaningful life is just like goosebumps right now. I mean, it's life changing. So if that can happen with one person, people deserve to have that. And I think a big part of this really is just, again, trying your best to make local change. And then, you know, we see in Massachusetts, eight cities.
Yeah.
That's incredible. In Salem, there's tons of discussions about this going on still. You know,
Yeah.
people are really getting on the bandwagon, so to speak. So I think the more we can do to really just try to get everybody involved, get these voices amplified, and continue discussions in all areas, whether it's the dinner table, it's going to these public meetings, or it's more in a public forum. I think whatever you can do is the best way to be able to get involved.
So, yeah, pivoting to Jamie, and then we'll wrap it up here very quickly. One, would encourage folks to have some conversations with Jamie about affordability and access and how the stereotypes surrounding what affordability and access looks like for certain individuals is much broader. I think, you know, nobody's debating that our in the U.S. American healthcare system is not so efficient, to put it lightly. And who wouldn't, again, to your point, who's the victim? And you know, a mother or an individual who's moving heaven and earth to find something that actually works in the face of having tried all the other options. Why should they be criminalized? Jamie, one, I want to highlight a bill that you helped write in partnership with, you know, your masculine co-founder, CJ LeConte, who's not able to join us tonight, be around. Fantastic veteran voice in this space. But you all helped draft a bill that models one that was been filed in New York, and you know, important to note, in the long haul, it's a very unique bill that Jamie will tell you a little bit more about. But it's been filed, I think, 3 times now in New York. It might not make it to the governor's desk, might not, you know, make it to committee this year. But in speaking with the folks in New York, they're really excited that it's gaining traction, and it's been a lot of really interesting conversations surrounding a middle ground between hyper commercialization, retail dispenser models, while also not tying access to care to the medical system inherently. So, Jamie, can you talk a little bit about the kind of shout out Allison Hoots from New Yorkers for Mental Health Alternatives and Sacred Plant Alliance, the legal mastermind behind this model. Jamie, do you want to give us a brief overview, and then maybe talk about why that model works for you and helps address the financial affordability of hyper-regulated therapeutic models.
Yeah, it is pretty much exactly the New York bill, which also was introduced in Connecticut, I think.
Yes, that is also, this New York model is proliferated in New Mexico, Arizona, Connecticut. There's some other bill being filed, I believe, in Indiana. Actually.
Yep. So again, thanks to Allison Hoots for that model.
New Hampshire as well.
Yes, interesting. Given how they are in cannabis, but yeah, so it's basically a permit model where people would do a safety screening, make sure there's no conditions that would not be considered safe, and then would take an online course, a safety course, to just educate them about potential harms and how to use these medicines safely, and then they would get a permit to use them. Basically, like you get a license to carry a gun, you get a license to drive a car. This, you know, is one way we're hoping that it'll get some, you know, traction in the legislature. You know, I'm for full decrim. I'm for people making their own decisions and not for a lot of regulation. But after the failure of the ballot question, you know, we were told time and time again by lawmakers that just straight decrim is not going anywhere anytime soon at a, you know, a state level, which is really unfortunate. We are at mass healing, and you know, maybe with decrim nature, decrim mass being resurrected, who knows? But we really want to focus on continuing to add to those decriminalized communities. But yeah, the permit model, it was sort of in between. Something that lawmakers who feel like they need a little more regulation around could get behind.
Yeah.
So, you know, not ideal for me personally, but, you know, I guess a step in the right direction, and would make it much more affordable for people, not having to only access this through the a very expensive, regulated model like what we would have gotten under the ballot question.
We're gonna have full decriminal with that.
We would have gotten, yes, we would have gotten the best of both worlds.
Yeah. In theory.
In theory, but
Yeah. So very quickly, Jamie, those who don't know, the Connecticut folks, our origin story and connecting with them and being able to cover what they're up to also has roots in some of the grassroots misconduct. They'd also have run-ins with, and I wish they didn't ever speak to it. But Jamie, as a result of all of us coming together, kind of, in conjunction with some negative experiences, a new way forward has been emerging. And I know we might not be able to talk about, a ton of specifics, but just to confirm, there's a Northeast Advocacy kind of psychedelic alliance forming, right, with interstate groups kind of banding together.
yes,
That's great.
After the failure of the ballot question, there was a lot of interest from activists in other states about, what really went wrong, what happened, lessons learned, and for me, a desire to bring us all together to sort of streamline things so that we could share resources, share ideas, learn from each other, so that we're not sort of doing our own thing and recreating the wheel, in our individual states. But feel like it's really important for us to band together nationwide, because what's good for one state in the Northeast is good for all the others, and nationwide, really, like we're really all in this together. So any progress in any state in this country is good for us all. But bringing a Northeast Alliance has already formed. We've had 2 meetings, and there's conversations about nationwide organization.
Amazing. Stay tuned we'll have folks in the New Yorkers for Mental Health Alternatives, as well as Connecticut and some other New England Alliance, Regional Alliance folks that will be in town for our all-day showcase on March 20th. Ram is our resident encyclopedia. We can get back to you, just fact checking. To your knowledge, has there been any increased public health harms associated with use of psychedelics in any of the 8 cities in Massachusetts where, de facto law enforcement deprioritization, pseudo decrim has been approved?
Well, Jack, you totally don't already know this answer. No, is the short answer. No.
No.
I mean, we had a researcher, an independent researcher, looked into it during the ballot question campaign, and no change. No statistically significant change in any metric that's relevant before and after decriminating the cities in Massachusetts.
Makes one wonder why that wasn't talked about a little bit more throughout the course of the campaign itself. More to come on that soon. For now, we'll close out. First of all, love to give our incredible panel for a round of applause. We will shut off the live stream here in a second. But for those who are watching from abroad, who might be watching the recording later on, thank you for tuning in. Thank you, all of you, showed up in person, gone a little bit later than expected. Not uncommon for this community who love to chat about all of the above and more. I would be remiss not to just say thank you. We hope to be able to build this into something bigger than all this. And I think that this is a historic moment for this community that I hope we can look back on as pivotal for building a better way forward. None of this would be possible without all of you, but for some closing thanks, I want to thank our courageous hosts here at Udea Cannabis Co. in partnership with true supporters. Our media sponsor, Talking Joints, not only my mentor, Psychedelics Today, and CEO, founder Joe Moore, supporting us out from Colorado with the live stream support team, and all the incredible advocates who give scribblers like me something to write about in the first place. Without you, I am nothing, quite literally.
Thank you, Jack.
Coming back on March 20th, on a long road show. Yeah, have a good night.